Excuse me. I don't know what you think is happening here, but this seat is mine. It's always been mine. So why don't you find somewhere else to put your things before this gets uncomfortable?" She didn't look up from her phone when she said it. That was the part that stung the most. Not the words themselves, though the words were bad enough. It was the casualness of it. The way she delivered that sentence, the same way someone might wave off a waiter who had brought the wrong bread. No eye contact, no hesitation, no acknowledgement that the man standing in the aisle with a leather duffel over his shoulder was anything more than a minor inconvenience between her and her sparkling water. Marcus Webb stood very still. He looked at the seat number printed on the overhead panel. He looked at the woman settled into the window seat like she had been there for hours. He looked at the boarding pass on his phone, the one that had been confirmed twice by Damon Price that morning, with a single follow-up text, 2A, double-checked. "You're good." And then Marcus Webb did something that would define the next 40 minutes of everyone's life on that aircraft. He didn't move. He had built Apex Airlines from a single leased gate, a borrowed loan, and the specific stubbornness of a man who had been told no so many times that the word had stopped meaning anything to him. He had turned that airline into one of the fastest-growing regional carriers in the country. He had done it quietly without a publicist, or a personal brand, or a reality show. He had done it the way most great things are built, in rooms where people underestimated him with patience that other people mistook for submission. And now he was standing in a cabin he owned in a seat he had paid for being told to find somewhere else to put his things. Before we get into what happened next, and trust me, it flips everything, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. We love seeing this community from all over. And if you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong somewhere, you've earned hit that subscribe button. Because this story is for you. Now let's go back to how this moment even started. Now let's rewind to 3 hours before Diana Holloway said those words. Marcus Webb had just finished 6 days in Phoenix that he would later describe to Damon as the kind of week that makes you question whether people are capable of listening or just waiting for their turn to talk. 4 back-to-back investor meetings in climate-controlled conference rooms where the air tasted like recycled ambition. 2 crisis calls about an operational failure at a regional hub in Tucson. A ground crew scheduling collapse that had cascaded into 4 delayed departures and 1 very public social media meltdown from a passenger who had missed his daughter's wedding. And 1 board dinner at a steakhouse where a senior member named Gerald, who had been with the company since before Marcus acquired it, spent 40 minutes talking over him about a fleet expansion strategy that Marcus had already approved 3 months ago. Not a hostile week. Just the particular exhaustion of being a black man who has to work twice as hard to be heard half as much, even in a room full of people whose paychecks he signed. He was flying home to Atlanta. Not in a company jet. He had quietly mothballed that option 8 months ago, the same week he started what he privately called the audit. Not an official audit with spreadsheets and compliance reports, though those would come later. This was something more personal. Marcus wanted to see Apex the way his customers saw it. No advance notice to the crew, no special handling at the gate, no title visible on the booking. Just a name and a seat assignment and whatever experience the airline he had built actually delivered to the people who kept it alive. He had been doing it every 2 weeks for 8 months. Domestic routes, different class cabins, different times of day. He kept notes in a leather journal that he carried everywhere. Not digital, not shareable, just handwritten observations in precise, unhurried script. He had filled half of it already. Tonight he was flying Phoenix to Atlanta. Seat 2, A first class. Marcus Webb 44 moved through Phoenix Sky Harbor the way he moved through most spaces, without announcing himself. Salt and pepper beard trimmed close to the jaw. Broad shoulders that carried themselves with the ease of a man who had stopped needing to prove he could hold weight. Charcoal Henley, dark-fitted jeans, white sneakers that were clean but not fresh from the box. A single leather duffel over one shoulder. No designer logos, no visible watch, no accessories that signaled anything except that he had packed light and thought about it. He had learned a long time ago that the loudest thing in a room doesn't have to be your clothes. Sometimes it's your silence. Sometimes it's the way you take up space without apologizing for it. He stopped at a terminal coffee stand and ordered black coffee in a paper cup. He paid in cash. He stood by the window for a few minutes and drank it slowly, watching the planes taxi on the tarmac outside. There was something he had always loved about airports at dusk. The way the runway lights came on in long parallel lines, and the way the planes moved with this enormous deliberateness, all that mass and thrust translated into something that looked from a distance almost patient. He had loved planes since he was 9 years old. That hadn't changed. What had changed was everything else. As he moved toward his gate, Marcus observed the way he always observed now. Methodically, without judgment, just watching. A gate agent at a neighboring counter snapped at a young Hispanic mother who was struggling to fold her stroller one-handed while her toddler pulled at her sleeve. The snap wasn't loud or profane. It was the quiet, efficient dismissal of someone who had decided in under 2 seconds that this woman's difficulty was an imposition. Marcus noted it, moved on. At a charging station near Gate C-14, a businessman in an expensive suit cut directly in front of an elderly man who had been waiting unplugged the elderly man's phone without looking at him and plugged in his own. No acknowledgement, no apology, not even a glance. The elderly man looked at his phone lying on the bench beside him, then looked at the businessman and this was the part Marcus noted most carefully, decided not to say anything. That decision, that precise moment of calculation where someone weighs the cost of speaking up against the cost of letting it go and chooses the latter. Marcus had made that calculation himself more times than he could count. He understood it completely. He was still deciding every single day which version of it to make. He checked his phone once before reaching the gate. One message from Damon Price Flights on time. Seat confirmed 2A. I double-checked. Also, Gerald called again about the fleet expansion. I told him you'd follow up Monday. Marcus typed back 2 words. Good. Thanks. He pocketed the phone and found a standing spot near the gate window just to the left of the boarding lanes. The gate area was filling up. A busy Phoenix to Atlanta run on a Thursday evening, mostly business travelers, a few families, a cluster of college students with matching school colors on their bags. The kind of cross-section that reminded Marcus why he had gotten into this business in the first place. Not for the frequent flyers with their platinum cards and their upgrade lists. For all of it. For the mother with the stroller, the elderly man at the charging station, the college kid flying home for the first time after a semester away. That was who he built the airline for. That was who he needed to see it working for. That was when he noticed Diana Holloway. She was standing near the front of the first-class boarding lane, slightly apart from the other waiting passengers, positioned with the unconscious authority of someone who considers the front of every line her natural habitat. Mid-40s, cream blazer with clean, sharp lapels, pearl bracelet, a carry-on with a designer logo that Marcus recognized without being able to name, the particular shorthand of expense signals he had never learned to read fluently and had never felt the need to. Blonde hair cut precisely to the shoulder. The posture of a woman who had delivered enough presentations to expensive rooms that standing straight had become involuntary. She was on the phone. Her voice was at the specific volume that says this call is important without actually raising the volume enough to be rude. Something about a Chicago account and someone who should have called her first, and a decision that was being made without her sign-off, and what exactly she was paying them for, if not to keep her in the loop. Marcus listened for about 15 seconds, not intently, just in the way you absorb sound in a public space. He noticed that she glanced at her watch twice in the span of 1 minute. He noticed that when another passenger stepped briefly into the first-class lane to check the departure board, Diana shifted her body slightly, not dramatically, just enough, to reclaim her position without anyone technically calling her on it. He didn't think much of her specifically. He had met many people who moved through the world with this quality, the deep, settled assumption that space was theirs until proven otherwise. It was more common than people admitted. It crossed every demographic, every income level, every industry. What made it noticeable was when it happened to coincide with someone who looked like Marcus. His group was called. He stepped forward, handed his phone to the gate agent. A young man who scanned it without looking up got a green light and said, "Have a good flight," in the direction of his screen. Marcus thanked him and walked the jet bridge. The bridge was slightly cool, slightly echoey the way they always were. He walked it slowly, duffel over one shoulder, rolling nothing. The sound of his sneakers on the corrugated floor was soft and even. He stepped into the aircraft, turned left, first class. 6 rows, 2 seats each side. Soft lighting. The smell of fresh coffee from the galley underneath it, the faint cool of recycled air. He looked toward row 2. Stopped. Seat 2. A was occupied. Not tentatively occupied, not accidentally occupied. Fully, completely settled in. Occupied. The woman from the gate had beaten him aboard somehow, likely through an earlier boarding group or a conversation with a gate agent that Marcus hadn't seen, and she had chosen row 2 window side with the comfort and certainty of someone arriving home rather than someone sitting in a stranger's seat. Diana Holloway's cream blazer was already hung neatly on the hook above the seat. Her carry-on was stowed. Her sparkling water, which Marcus noted had been poured and waiting before he had even walked the jet bridge, meaning the crew had served her quickly, was in the seat pocket holder beside her. Her phone was propped on the tray table at an angle playing something. Both earbuds were in. She was in every visible way already gone from this moment and into the next one. Marcus stood in the aisle and looked at the seat number on the overhead panel 2A. He looked at the woman in the seat. He looked at his boarding pass. He set his duffel gently in the overhead compartment directly above the row, his row, and stood for a moment. She had the particular stillness of someone who had never once in her adult life been told no and genuinely believed it. Not a villain necessarily. Not a person who had planned this, who had strategized it, who had woken up that morning with the intention of taking what wasn't hers. Just a person so thoroughly accustomed to the world arranging itself around her preferences that she had ceased to notice, or perhaps had never needed to notice when it cost someone else something to make that happen. The cabin was not yet full. 2B was empty. Several seats throughout first class were still unoccupied. Other passengers were boarding behind Marcus in a slow, irregular stream, creating an inadvertent audience for whatever was about to happen in row 2. Marcus noted this. He also noted the young man in 3B, who glanced up from his laptop with the particular alertness of someone whose professional instincts had just fired, and the young woman in 4A who had stopped scrolling her phone to look, and the older gentleman in 1B who peered over the top of his newspaper and held his gaze for a moment before returning to the page. Marcus breathed once. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The specific practiced breath of a man who had been having this kind of moment for 44 years and had decided somewhere along the way that it would not own him. Then he spoke. "Excuse me." His voice was level, courteous. The voice of a man asking for what he needed rather than demanding what he deserved. "I think there might be a mix-up. This is 2A. That's my seat." Diana pulled out one earbud, just one. She looked at him. Her eyes did the thing that some people's eyes do. The rapid involuntary assessment that starts at the shoes and works upward and lands somewhere non-committal. Marcus had seen this assessment enough times in enough contexts that he could feel it without watching for it. It took under 2 seconds. It reached no satisfactory conclusion in her favor, but it reached a conclusion nonetheless. "No," she said. "This is my seat. I booked it." Her tone was even dismissive, the tone of someone correcting a minor administrative error rather than speaking to another human being. She didn't say it with cruelty. She said it the way people say things when they have already decided the conversation is over before the other person has finished speaking. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Marcus asked. "Mine shows 2A as well." She sighed. Not dramatically. Not rudely technically. Just with the specific weariness of someone who finds an extended conversation about something obvious to be a tax on their time. "I don't need to show you my boarding pass," she said. "I know what I booked." "I'm not trying to make this difficult," Marcus said. Still calm, still even. "I just want to sit down, then sit somewhere else." She said it while putting the earbud back in. Done. Conversation over. The phone on the tray table resumed whatever it had been playing, and Diana Holloway turned her attention back to it with the decisive finality of a woman who had handled the matter. Marcus remained standing. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for her arm, did not lean into her space, did not perform outrage for the gathering audience. He simply stood there, in the aisle beside his row with his boarding pass visible on the phone in his hand, and waited. From 3B, Jordan Blake had stopped pretending to look at his laptop. He was 31, a travel and hospitality journalist whose byline appeared regularly in 3 national publications and whose antenna for the invisible architecture of how spaces were policed, who was welcomed, who was screened, who was asked to move, had been tuned over years of covering exactly these kinds of environments. He had written about it. He had documented it in hotel lobbies, airport lounges, restaurant reservation systems. He had never watched it unfold this close, this plainly in real time. He reached for his phone, set it on the tray at a casual angle. His thumb rested on the record button without pressing it yet. Not yet. In 4A, Natalie Cruz had already noticed. She was 26, a lifestyle content creator with 280,000 followers on TikTok, 190,000 on X, and the specific calibration of someone who understood the difference between content that entertained and content that mattered. She was not recording yet, but she was watching with the full attention of someone who had stopped filtering what she saw through the question of whether it was her business. It was her business. It was everyone's business. She just hadn't decided how to say that yet. In 1B, Hugh Merritt lowered his newspaper by a fraction. He was 64, white-haired, the kind of man who had bought his first-class seat in 1987 and considered the cabin a particular kind of sanctuary with unspoken codes and expectations. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Diana. He looked back at his newspaper. He did not turn the page. In 5A, Linda Santos shifted in her seat. She was 53, traveling alone to Atlanta to meet her daughter for a long-delayed visit that had been rescheduled 4 times due to work conflicts on both sides. She had a rolling bag in the overhead, a paperback in her lap, and the kind of awareness that comes from spending a lifetime reading rooms that weren't always hospitable. She did not speak yet, but she was watching. The cabin continued to fill around Marcus Webb, who stood in the aisle beside row 2 with his boarding pass in hand and his duffel in the overhead, and the particular stillness of a man who had decided very quietly that today was not the day he was going to be the one who made it easy. Rachel Burns appeared from the galley with a smile that had been loaded before she arrived at the row. The professional-grade smile calibrated to project calm, regardless of context, the one that flight attendants spend years perfecting precisely for moments like this one. She was 34, lead-attendant brown hair, pulled back the small laminated name tag reading Rachel pinned with perfect straightness to her lapel. She took in the scene in approximately 2 seconds, a man standing in the aisle beside 2A, a woman seated in 2AA quiet, that had the specific density of a dispute in progress rather than a conversation. In those 2 seconds, Marcus watched Rachel do the same invisible math he always watched people do. Who looks like the problem? Who looks like the passenger? It happened fast, faster than conscious thought, faster than policy training, and it had an answer before Rachel opened her mouth. She turned to Diana first. "Is everything okay here, ma'am?" Marcus kept his voice quiet and factual. "This woman is in my seat. 2A. My boarding pass confirms it." Rachel turned to him, the smile still in place, but with a degree of recalibration behind it. "Of course, sir. Can I just take a peek at both boarding passes?" She asked them both. Fair technically, but the order had been chosen. Marcus handed his pass over without expression. Diana held up her phone with the particular languidness of someone performing mild inconvenience. Rachel looked at Diana's pass. Something moved across her face. A brief, specific flicker, the involuntary registration of someone who has seen what they have seen and is deciding what to do about it. Then she looked at Marcus's pass. She looked at both again. One beat of real silence. "So your seat is 2A, Mr. Webb." Rachel's voice was measured quiet. She turned to Diana. "And, ma'am, yours is actually 3C. Diana removed both earbuds. She looked at Rachel with the expression of someone who has just been handed the wrong change at a coffee shop and needs a moment to decide how much to escalate it. 3C, she said. Not raised, not aggressive, just patient and absolute in the way that people are patient and absolute when they have decided the facts are wrong rather than their memory. That's not possible. I specifically requested window front cabin. There must be an error in your system. Rachel's posture softened by a precise and barely perceptible degree. I understand, ma'am. Let me just check. There's nothing to check, Diana said pleasantly. Still pleasant. That was the thing Marcus kept noting. How pleasant the whole register stayed while the content of what she was saying remained entirely immovable. I've flown Apex first class on this route 11 times. I know what I booked. Marcus watched Rachel's face make its decision. He knew this face. He had seen it in conference rooms and boardrooms and building lobbies. It was not the face of malice. It was the face of a person calculating which direction was lighter and choosing that direction without fully examining what they were leaving behind in the other one. Rachel turned to Marcus. Her voice dropped slightly, going for the register of quiet reason. Mr. Webb 3C is also in first class. It's a lovely seat. Same service, same. Just what Marcus said. The two words landed with a quietness that stopped Rachel mid-sentence more effectively than volume would have. Just what Marcus repeated. Just move? Is that what you're about to ask me? Rachel blinked. The smile held, but the certainty behind it had developed a crack. Before she could answer, Trevor Voss arrived. Trevor was 38, senior cabin crew tall, with the particular brand of confidence that comes from spending a decade being the person who resolved things. Or more precisely, the person who made problems stop being visible. He walked up with the stride of someone who had already decided the resolution before hearing the situation. What's the holdup, he said, not to anyone specifically, and then to Marcus specifically. We need to push back in 12 minutes, Rachel summarized. Trevor looked at Marcus, the fast functional look of a man categorizing rather than seeing, and said, Sir, if Rachel's offered you 3C, that's a reasonable solution. Same class, same service. Let's keep things moving. Marcus turned and looked at Trevor fully. He didn't speak immediately. The pause itself was a response. When he did speak, his voice was not raised. Each word was placed with the care of someone who has decided that precision matters more than volume. She is in my seat. Your colleague confirmed she is in my seat, and your solution is to ask me to leave it. We're trying to keep things smooth. Smooth for who? The cabin had gone completely quiet. Not the polite quiet of people pretending not to listen. The real quiet of people who had stopped pretending entirely and were simply openly watching. Diana set her sparkling water down, with a small, deliberate clink. She had been listening with the expression of someone watching a dispute between two people that has nothing to do with her. A posture of innocence that Marcus found in a specific way to be the most revealing thing that had happened in the last 10 minutes. She spoke now. Her voice was sweet with the particular poison of manufactured reasonableness. I really don't understand why this is so complicated. We're all adults. He gets a perfectly good seat. I stay where I am. The plane takes off on time. Everyone wins. She picked up her sparkling water and took a sip. Marcus said quietly. Not everyone. The two words dropped into the silence of the cabin and sat there. Trevor tried again, lowering his voice, stepping half a pace closer to Marcus in the way people step when they want to have a confrontation without appearing to have one. Sir, I'm going to be straightforward with you. Take 3C. This is not worth holding up a full flight over one seat. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Say that one more time. Loudly enough for everyone in this cabin to hear exactly what you just said to me. Trevor did not repeat it. From 3B, Jordan Blake's phone was now up, angled into his lap, not conspicuously but recording. The caption on X typed and ready but not yet posted first class. Apex Flight 318, Phoenix to Atlanta. Watch what happens next. His thumb hovered. In 4A, Natalie Cruz had both earbuds out. She was fully present, fully watching with the specific expression of someone who has just confirmed that what she thought she was seeing is, in fact, exactly what she is seeing. Hugh Merritt had lowered his newspaper entirely. He held it in his lap, now folded, no longer looking at it. Linda Santos leaned to the woman beside her, a stranger she had not spoken to until this moment, and said just quietly enough to be heard by the 2 rows around her. They confirmed it's his seat. They confirmed it. And they're still asking him to move. That's not right. The woman beside her said nothing, but she nodded. Marcus looked at Trevor, then at Rachel, then at Diana, then slowly at the watching cabin around him. He had been in enough rooms to know when one had shifted, when the audience had stopped being passive and started becoming something else, something invested, something that would remember. He said to Diana, "What you just said, everyone wins. I want you to think about what that sentence requires." Diana blinked. "It requires," Marcus continued, "that I agree. My comfort counts for less than your convenience. That the rules work differently for me than they do for you. That when you take what's mine and I object, I'm the one making things complicated." He paused. "I've been asked to agree to that arrangement my whole life. I'm not agreeing today." The cabin held its breath. Diana said nothing. Trevor said nothing. Rachel looked at the floor, and Marcus Webb stood in the aisle beside seat 2A and did not move. Trevor said it again, quieter this time, as if reducing the volume would change the content. "We're just trying to keep things smooth, sir." The word smooth hit Marcus somewhere specific, not in the chest, not in the gut, somewhere older than that, somewhere that had been accumulating deposits for 2 decades. He was 26 years old, Charlotte, North Carolina, 2 years out of Morehouse working as a junior analyst at a regional carrier. The job had felt in those early months like the beginning of something. Not just a career, but a proof. A proof that the plan was working, that the work was landing, that the room was making space for him. He had spent 11 weeks on a cost reduction proposal. 11 weeks of late nights and early mornings of running the numbers 3 different ways to make sure they held, of reading every operations report from the previous 4 years to find the patterns that other people had missed. The proposal was solid. The logic was airtight. He had shown it to no one before the presentation because he was 26 and still believed that good work presented clearly carried its own argument. He had presented it to the operations director, a man named Dale Fitch, in a conference room on a Tuesday afternoon. 8 minutes. Deck numbers Q and A. Fitch had listened, nodded throughout, asked 2 questions that Marcus answered cleanly, and said at the end, "Good thinking." Let me run it by the team. 3 weeks later, a company-wide memo arrived. The subject line, New Cost Reduction Framework, Q3 Implementation. The author listed was a white colleague named Brad Townsend who had attended the same Tuesday afternoon meeting, asked no questions, and contributed nothing that Marcus had heard. The memo used Marcus's exact language, his figures, his projections, his framework including the specific phrase he had coined for the third section, cascade reduction sequencing, which he had been quietly proud of because he had invented it himself. Brad Townsend received a promotion 4 months later. Marcus went to HR. He sat across from a woman with a kind face and a carefully maintained professional neutrality, and he laid out the timeline, the language comparison, the facts. She listened with the same attentiveness that Dale Fitch had listened with, and at the end she said, "These things are so hard to prove. The language overlap could be coincidental. We'd really hate for this to become a distraction from the great work you're doing." Marcus had smiled. He had thanked her. He had walked out of her office and down the elevator and out of the building, and he had stood on the sidewalk in Charlotte for about 3 minutes looking at nothing in particular, feeling the very specific feeling of a person who has just been told with great warmth and professionalism that the truth they experienced does not qualify as the truth. He didn't rage, he didn't make calls or file paperwork or tell his colleagues. He went home, sat at his kitchen table, and started the business plan that would become Apex Airlines. He kept Brad Townsend's name in the back of his mind for years, not as an act of resentment. He had let the resentment go because resentment is weight you carry alone, and he had other things to carry. He kept Brad Townsend's name as a specific personal reminder of what the world would do quietly if you let it. It will take from you quietly, and then ask you to be grateful for what remains. It will ask you to be smooth about it. Marcus blinked. The first-class cabin of Apex Flight 318 reassembled itself around him. Trevor was still waiting. The watching passengers were still watching. Diana's sparkling water was still in her hand. He looked at Trevor. "I've been smooth long enough," Marcus said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the statement of a man who had made a decision. Not today, not this evening, not in this aisle, but over 20 years in rooms and hallways and HR offices and sidewalks where the word smooth had been used to make his stepping aside sound like wisdom instead of what it was. Trevor looked at him. The confidence in Trevor's posture had shifted by some degree that was hard to name exactly but impossible to miss. He said nothing. Rachel said nothing. In 3B, Jordan Blake's thumb pressed record. Trevor gathered himself. He was a man who recovered quickly. It was part of what had made him effective in his role for a decade, the ability to absorb a setback and reassemble the same posture within seconds. He stepped half a pace closer to Marcus, lowering his voice to the register of a man who wants to have a confrontation while technically remaining in the register of a resolution. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time. Take 3C. This is not worth delaying a full flight over one seat. Other passengers have connections. Other passengers have families waiting. One seat, sir. That's all this is." Marcus looked at him with the particular patience of a man who has heard the same argument repackaged multiple times and is waiting for something new. "I want you to listen to what you just said. You told me other passengers have connections, other passengers have families, but not once in everything you've said since you walked up here. Have you asked her why she won't move to her assigned seat?" Trevor's jaw shifted slightly. "Not once," Marcus continued, "have you applied the same standard of inconvenience to the person who caused this situation. You're asking me to absorb the cost of her choice. You've asked me 3 times, and each time you've framed it as the reasonable solution." He let a beat land. "I want you to say out loud why she gets to be the reasonable center of every solution you've offered." The cabin was completely quiet. Trevor opened his mouth, closed it, The words that would have come next, the procedural language, the customer service framework, the reasonable tone de-escalation script, had jammed somewhere between his brain and his mouth because Marcus had just named the exact mechanism that made them work and named mechanisms stop working the moment they're named. "Say it out loud," Marcus said again. Quiet, patient, absolute. Trevor said nothing. From 3B, Jordan was already live. His stream had opened 30 seconds ago, camera angled casually from his lap, voice low. "We're live on Apex Flight 318, Phoenix to Atlanta. First class. A man has been standing in the aisle next to his confirmed seat for going on 15 minutes. The crew has confirmed the seat is his. Watch what's happening. Initial viewers, 43. The number was already moving. He typed his caption without looking away from the scene. They confirmed it's his seat. They're still asking him to move. First class. Apex 318. In 4A, Natalie Cruz had made her decision. She opened TikTok, set the angle to catch the full width of the aisle without being conspicuous about it, and began recording. Her caption, drafted in the 20 seconds between observation and action, read, "This is happening right now. Apex Flight, Phoenix to Atlanta. He paid for his seat. Watch how they treat him." She hit post. The notification appeared small and quiet, confirming that the clip was live. Diana, for her part, had settled back slightly. She had the expression of someone watching two colleagues argue about something that has nothing to do with her. A studied detachment that required, Marcus noted, either genuine obliviousness or considerable practice. He suspected the latter. Hugh Merritt in 1B had set his newspaper completely in his lap. He was watching Trevor with the expression of a man who has spent 64 years learning to read rooms and does not like what he is reading. Linda, Santos in 5A, leaned toward the woman beside her again. "My daughter is in Atlanta. I have a connection. If I miss it..." She stopped and hailed. "This is wrong. Everyone here knows it's wrong." Trevor made one last attempt, his voice even lower now, the register of a man trying to find a lever he had not yet tried Mr. Webb with. "Respect the comfort of every passenger on this aircraft." "Is your responsibility," Marcus said. "Not mine. I followed every rule. I arrived. I boarded in my group. I found someone in my seat. I asked politely. Your colleague confirmed the seat is mine. I've done everything I was supposed to do. You are asking me to take the consequence of someone else's decision. I won't." Trevor stood up. He walked to the rear of the cabin. It was not a retreat with dignity. It was a man running out of script. From the galley entrance, Sophia Reyes had been watching the entire exchange. She was 27, the youngest crew member on Flight 383 years, with Apex still at the junior end of the seniority structure that governed everything from scheduling to route assignments to who got to lead a first-class cabin. She had dark hair pulled back, simply steady hands, and the specific moral clarity that sometimes belongs to people who are young enough that they have not yet fully learned to talk themselves out of it. She had watched Rachel fail. She had watched Trevor make it worse. She had watched the senior members of her crew choose the easier direction twice in a row, and she had felt with each iteration the mounting weight of what it meant to stay quiet while it happened. Sophia knew what she was supposed to do: stay in her lane, follow Rachel's lead, keep the cabin smooth. She had been told in one form or another 3 different times over the past year when she had pushed back on incidents that echoed this one. Smaller incidents, less public ones that had dissolved before they became visible, that she was reading situations incorrectly. That sensitivity was admirable but misplaced, that her job was to serve, not to interpret. She had nodded and moved on each time. She was not going to nod this time. Sophia Reyes stepped out of the galley and walked up the aisle. She was not performing this. She was not making it large. She simply walked up and stood near row 2 and said in a clear, even voice that carried without effort, "Excuse me. I want to make sure everyone's working from the same information." Rachel looked at her with the expression of a senior colleague watching a junior one step onto ice. I've checked the manifest twice, Sophia continued. Seat 2A is registered to Mr. Webb. There is no dispute in the system, no flag, no error. The assignment is his. That's not my opinion. That's what the manifest says. Trevor, who had come back forward, turned to her Sophia. The seat is his, Sophia said. She didn't raise her voice. But she didn't wobble either. I'm not going to say otherwise. Rachel looked at the floor. Diana looked at Sophia with an expression that was recalibrating in real time. The specific expression of someone who has been operating on the assumption that the room is on their side and has just encountered data that complicates that assumption. Marcus looked at Sophia. Between them, in that brief exchange of eye contact, something passed that didn't require words. The specific recognition that moves between two people when one of them has just done something that cost them something and the other one understands exactly what the cost was. Thank you, Marcus said. Quiet, direct, entirely sincere. Diana set down her water glass with that small, deliberate clink. Well, she said, her voice taking on the tone of someone who has been waiting to play a card and has finally decided the moment is right. I suppose we'll need the captain. Trevor was already walking toward the cockpit. The cabin settled into a new quality of waiting. Not the restless impatience of a delayed departure, but the taut, held-breath quality of a room that knows something larger than a seating dispute is being decided. Jordan's stream had 340 viewers. He was narrating quietly, steadily, with the calm of a man who has been trained to observe without editorializing and is choosing tonight to let the facts do the editorializing themselves. We are at a full stop here. The crew has gone to get the captain. This man has not raised his voice. He has not threatened anyone. He has said one thing repeatedly with complete consistency for 18 minutes. That is my seat. Comments flooded the screen beside his stream. He's so calm. They'd have moved someone else by now. Name the airline. He posted a still frame. Marcus, standing in the aisle duffel in the overhead boarding pass visible, with the caption Apex Airlines, Flight 318, Phoenix to Atlanta. He paid for that seat. Viewer count 680. Crossing 800. Moving. Natalie Cruz's TikTok clip, 45 seconds raw and unedited, had 2,200 views in 4 minutes and was being shared with a comment that had been liked 400 times already. The look on his face isn't anger. It's recognition. He's been here before. That's what breaks my heart. She didn't know yet how completely accurate that observation was. Jordan Blake did not consider himself an activist. He was a journalist. He covered travel and hospitality, airport infrastructure, airline customer experience, the invisible rules of how premium spaces worked and who they were actually designed for. He had written about this, specifically about this. He had documented the gap between how airline policies read on paper and how they landed in practice with particular attention to the way certain kinds of passengers, certain ages, certain dress codes, certain skin tones, were subjected to verification processes that others moved through without friction. He had written a long piece about it 18 months ago for a national travel publication. The piece had done well. It had generated letters, some supportive and some very much not, and it had changed nothing that he could see from the outside. And now he was watching it happen in the row directly behind him. He kept his voice low and level. His reporting instincts, the discipline of description before interpretation, of letting the viewer see rather than being told what to see, took over completely. He's been standing for 18 minutes. 18 minutes in the aisle next to his own seat, which the crew has confirmed twice is his seat. He has not raised his voice. He has not used threatening language. He has not touched anyone. He has simply said over and over with the patience of a man who has had to be patient about things like this his entire life, that is my seat. Viewer count 1,400. Comments scrolling faster than he could read them. I'm booking a different airline after this. Where's the captain? This is the most patient man alive. They should be ashamed. Somebody needs to give this man his seat. Jordan posted a second clip. 30 seconds, just the audio of Trevor's last exchange with Marcus, the part where Marcus said smooth for who, with the caption, the question that broke the script. It was shared 40 times in the first 3 minutes. In 4A, Natalie Cruz understood her audience in the specific and functional way of someone who had built a following by being accurate about what mattered to people. She knew that her 280,000 followers did not follow her for outrage content. They followed her for travel realism, for honest reviews of spaces that sold one thing and delivered another. They trusted her precisely because she didn't perform. She was not performing. She posted a second clip. 45 seconds, different angle, catching Diana's expression during Marcus's last statement. The studied detachment, the polished calm that required effort to maintain the particular quality of a woman who had decided she was watching rather than participating. No music, no text overlay, just the clip. Beneath it, she typed one sentence: watch her face when he talks, not his. Hers. 6 minutes, 8,400 views. 9 minutes, 22,000. 12 minutes, 61,000, and climbing. The comment pinned at the top with over 4,000 likes. The look on his face isn't anger. It's recognition. He's been here before. That's what breaks my heart. Natalie read that comment and held it for a moment. Then she looked up from her phone to the cabin around her and back at Marcus standing in the aisle, and she thought that person is right, and they don't even know how right they are. Hugh Merritt decided in the precise and unhurried way of a man who has been deciding things carefully for 6 decades that it was time to say something. He did not address the crew. He had watched the crew's performance and had formed his opinion of it, and addressing them now would serve no purpose he cared about. He addressed Diana. Not loudly, in the conversational tone of a man who has nothing to prove. You know, I've been flying first class on various airlines for going on 40 years. Different carriers, different routes, domestic and international. And in all that time, I have never once, not once, had someone check my boarding pass twice, or question whether I had really paid for the seat I was sitting in, or suggest that perhaps I'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Diana looked at him. I don't see what that has to do with. I'm just observing, Hugh said pleasantly. Because the thing that interests me is that he has been asked in the last 20 minutes to do all 3 of those things. And the only variable I can identify between his experience and mine is... He paused, picked up his newspaper, folded it carefully. Well, he said, I think everyone in this cabin can finish that sentence. The silence that followed was the kind that contains a completed thought rather than the absence of one. Linda Santos spoke next. She had been holding it for several minutes, the pressure of watching something wrong happen in front of her, while calculating whether it was her place to say anything. She had made that calculation too many times in her life. She was 53, and she was done calculating. This is wrong, she said. Not to anyone specific. To the cabin. Everybody here can see it's wrong. I see it, that man sees it. She gestured toward Hugh. The people watching on that phone see it. Everybody sees it. Nobody disagreed. The man in 4B, business attire, laptop open, had said nothing all evening. Turned his phone around slowly so that it faced the aisle. On the screen, Natalie's TikTok clip already at 38,000 views, comments scrolling. He held it up for no one in particular, not speaking, just letting the numbers speak. Then he turned it back. Diana looked around the cabin. She really looked perhaps for the first time since she had boarded. She saw Hugh's expression. She saw Linda's posture. She saw the phones. Not just Natalie's and Jordan's, but several others passengers who had pulled out their own devices. She saw the comments that were visible on the nearest screen. She saw 61,000 and the number still moving. She put her own phone face down in her lap. Her blazer was still hung neatly on the hook above 2A. Her sparkling water glass was empty. Her posture, which had been the posture of a woman who owned every room she entered, had changed by a degree that would have been invisible to someone who hadn't been watching. Marcus was watching. He said, "An honest mistake ends when someone shows you the proof. What you've done since the proof is something else." Diana said nothing. But the something else hung in the air of the cabin, named and visible in a way that the sparkling water and the cream blazer and the pearl bracelet could not unname. Hugh's words landed on Marcus with a weight that came from somewhere older than tonight. "I wonder how many times he has." Marcus was 31 years old. Charlotte, North Carolina. Again. Charlotte, the city that had built him and broken him at regular intervals, and that he returned to in memory the way some people return to a river they learned to swim in. He had just closed the financing for his first real acquisition, a small regional carrier in the southeast. 14 planes, 200 employees, a route map that covered most of the mid-Atlantic corridor. It was not a large acquisition by the standards of the industry, but it was his, and it represented 6 years of groundwork, 3 failed attempts to secure backing, and one final meeting in which Marcus had refused to lower his equity stake by a single percentage point, regardless of what they offered in exchange. He had won. The paperwork was signed. The acquisition was his. The closing dinner was at a private members club in uptown Charlotte. Dark wood paneling, oil portraits in heavy frames, the faint smell of old money and new polish. The kind of room that had a very specific idea of who belonged in it and had been practicing that idea for 100 years. Marcus arrived in a blazer and slacks, clean shoes, nothing flashy. He had learned by 31 that his presence in certain rooms needed to carry its own argument, and that argument was made most effectively not by display but by the quality of what he said and the steadiness of how he said it. The man at the entrance door was perhaps 55, with the particular composure of someone whose job it was to sort people at thresholds. He looked at Marcus once, the same 2-second assessment shoes to face reaching no satisfactory conclusion, and said, "Members and their guests only this evening, sir. Are you with the catering team?" 3 of the investors were already inside. Marcus had spent 6 years in rooms with those men. He was about to sit at their table for the dinner celebrating the deal he had just made them significant money on. He had signed the paperwork 4 hours ago that made him their business partner. He was going to be sitting at the head of the table in 11 minutes. He did not say any of this. He looked at the man at the door. Not with anger, because anger in that doorway would have made the room smaller in the way that anger always makes rooms smaller, and said in the quietest possible voice, "I'm with myself." He produced his invitation. The man looked at it, looked at Marcus, looked at the invitation again, stepped aside without a word. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the mechanical clearing of the path that the invitation had technically required of him. Inside, the dinner went well. The investors were warm. Someone toasted Marcus. Someone else called him the future of regional aviation in the country, and meant it as a compliment, and it was a compliment, and Marcus received it graciously, and said the right things, and shook the right hands. But he ate his dinner with the weight of the front door sitting somewhere in his chest. The 2-second assessment, the specific question. "Are you with the catering team?" He never told anyone about it. Not that evening, not later, not in any of the dozens of interviews he gave over the following decade as Apex grew. It wasn't a story he wanted to carry outwardly, because carrying it outwardly would have required him to hand it to rooms that would have made it about something other than what it actually was. What it actually was, the specific accumulated weight of being a black man in spaces that had been designed without him in mind entering them anyway, succeeding in them anyway, and still being asked at the door if he was there to serve the food. He built from it. Every acquisition, every route, every anonymous audit flight on his own aircraft. All of it built partly from the fuel of being underestimated by people who should have known better and chose in the moment when it mattered not to. Marcus blinked. Hugh was still across the aisle. The older man had set his newspaper down completely. He was watching Marcus with the expression of someone who had said the thing they needed to say and was waiting to see if it had reached. Marcus gave him a small nod. Hugh nodded back. In that exchange, quiet, brief between two men who had never spoken before tonight, something passed that didn't need elaboration. An acknowledgement. A witnessing. The specific solidity of being seen by someone who chose to see. Sometimes that is enough. The cockpit door opened. Captain Frank Delano stepped into the cabin. Captain Frank Delano was 52, which was visible in the silver at his temples and the particular economy of his movements. A man who had been doing his job long enough that competence had become instinctive rather than performed. He had precise posture, the kind developed over decades of sitting upright in a cockpit seat, and a face that had absorbed enough in-flight surprises to have stopped registering surprise as a visible expression. He stepped out of the cockpit with the measured authority of someone accustomed to being the final word in a room, and walked the aisle toward row 2, scanning first class in one sweep as he moved. He had been briefed by Trevor. The briefing had been passenger in 2A, refusing to comply. Seating dispute. Needs resolution before pushback. That was the entirety of what he had been told. That framing, refusing to comply, was doing a specific kind of work, and Marcus registered it when he saw Delano's eyes make their initial sweep the fast, functional assessment that starts at the shoes. Delano stopped at row 2. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Diana. He looked at the phones that were raised in various positions throughout the cabin, some conspicuous, most not all recording. He took one beat longer than he probably intended to before speaking, and in that beat, Marcus watched him recalibrate just slightly in the way that people recalibrate when they walk into a room and find it different from how they were told it would be. "What's the situation?" Trevor started to step forward. Marcus spoke first, quietly, without rushing. "The situation is that this is my seat, confirmed twice by your crew, and I've been asked 3 times in the last 20 minutes to leave it. That's the situation." Delano looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at the floor. He looked at Trevor. Trevor held his posture, but the certainty in it had developed the specific quality of a structure that is intact but has been compromised at a load-bearing point. Delano said, "I'd like to see both boarding passes." He asked it of both of them simultaneously, which was either a genuine gesture of procedural fairness or a learned performance of it. Marcus could not be certain which. He handed his pass over without expression. Diana sighed minimally and held up her phone. Delano examined them with the unhurried care of a man who was going to get this right regardless of how long it took, which Marcus respected, even as he noted that it had taken a captain to apply this level of care to something that should have been resolved by the first crew member who looked. Jordan's live stream, 2,300 viewers ticking upward every few seconds. He narrated quietly. "The captain is reviewing both boarding passes. This has now been verified 3 times by 3 different members of the crew. 3 times. Same result every time." Delano looked up. His voice was unhurried and clear. "Seat 2A is registered to Mr. Webb. Seat 3C is registered to Ms. Holloway." The statement landed in the cabin with the weight of an official confirmation of something everyone already knew. For one moment, one brief, almost possible moment, it seemed like the thing might simply resolve. Diana would move. The plane would push back. Everyone would go home slightly late but intact. The story would be a story people told on this flight and nowhere else. But Diana did not move. She set her sparkling water down with a precise, controlled movement. She straightened her blazer collar with one hand. Then she spoke with the slow, measured cadence of someone who has identified the tone most likely to carry an argument that the facts have not supported. Captain, I absolutely respect your role here, and I'm not trying to be difficult. But I do think it's worth asking whether there might have been a system error of some kind. These things happen with mobile passes. I've flown this route 11 times, and I've always been in the front cabin. I'm a 6-year Apex customer. Surely. The documentation is clear, ma'am, Delano said. Not unkindly. But the sentence had no give in it. Diana paused. She nodded once, as though absorbing this, and then in what Marcus would later recognize as the most revealing moment of the entire evening, I just don't think it's fair to treat me like some kind of criminal. I made an honest mistake about a seat number. The word criminal dropped into the cabin and landed with a specific weight. Marcus felt it. From the sound of the quiet that followed, the particular quality of a room that has heard a word and is registering its full range of implication, everyone else felt it too. From 3B, Jordan said into his stream, barely above a whisper, "Did you catch that word? Criminal?" He never accused her of anything. She introduced that word. She chose it. Think about who that word gets applied to in situations like this. The comment feed moved so fast, the individual comments blurred. Delano paused. He was a man of procedure, and procedure had given him the clear outcome. 2A was Webb's seat. Holloway needed to move. The facts were settled. The action was obvious. But between obvious and executed, there is a small human gap. And in that gap, Delano did the same invisible math that Rachel and Trevor had done before him. His eyes moved, briefly involuntarily, from Marcus's sneakers to Diana's pearl bracelet, from Marcus's Henley to Diana's blazer, from the certainty in Marcus's posture to the well-maintained composure of Diana's, and he chose the gap. "Mr. Webb." He began, his voice taking on the careful register of a man managing a situation rather than resolving one. "I absolutely understand your frustration, but in the interest of getting this flight moving and keeping all our passengers comfortable, no." One word. Dropped into the captain's sentence like a stone. Delano stopped. The cabin stopped. Marcus stood up. Not aggressively. He rose to his full height in the measured, deliberate way of a man who is choosing to take up the space he is entitled to. He was the same height as Delano. He looked at him directly. "You were about to ask me to take 3C. Don't," Delano said. "Mr. Webb, I've heard the same suggestion 4 times in 25 minutes. And each time it's been framed as the practical solution. The smooth solution, the solution that keeps everyone comfortable. What it actually is," Marcus said, "is an instruction to pretend the rules work the same way for me as they do for her. And they don't. And everyone in this cabin has just watched for 25 minutes the proof of that." He looked around the cabin, not for support. He wasn't performing this for the audience. He was simply acknowledging that there was one. This flight is not leaving until this is handled the right way, not the convenient way, the right way. Captain Delano stood very still. Marcus sat back down in 2A, in his seat, with the calm of a man who has completed a sentence and is waiting for the world to catch up to it. Jordan said into his live stream, his voice stripped of everything except documentation, "He just told the captain the plane is not leaving, and the plane is not moving. Viewer count 300. Climbing." Natalie Cruz posted a still frame. Marcus seated in 2A, Delano standing in the aisle, the full first-class cabin visible behind them, with a single line of text. "He built this airline. They just don't know it yet." She didn't know when she typed it how precisely accurate it was. Delano returned to the cockpit. The door closed behind him with the soft, pressurized click of an aircraft door. Final and sealed. 5 minutes passed. The gate bridge remained extended. The aircraft did not move. A murmur ran through economy as passengers began comparing notes about the delay. Weather maintenance gate issue. A few checked their phones, pulling up connection times, recalculating margins. A woman near the back asked Rachel, who had retreated to the aisle between economy and first class, what was happening. Rachel said, "Small cabin situation. Being resolved. Shouldn't be long." Her voice was steady. Her face told a different story. In first class, nobody was pretending. The phones were still raised. The conversations in low pairs had the specific urgency of people who know they are watching something that does not resolve quietly. The cabin had the quality of a room after a storm has been announced but not yet arrived. Then the intercom crackled. Delano's voice measured and neutral the professional pilot register that is designed to carry information without carrying alarm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently holding at the gate due to a cabin situation requiring attention. We apologize for the inconvenience and will provide an update shortly. Thank you for your patience." A wave of sound moved through the aircraft, the complex layered sound of 140 people processing inconvenience and uncertainty simultaneously. Some groaned, some sighed. A few in economy moved to the curtain to look into first class, drawn by the announcement and the feeling that whatever was happening up there. Jordan narrated steadily. "The plane is not moving. He said it wouldn't. It is not moving. I have 4,800 people watching right now. 4,800 people watching a first-class cabin on a delayed aircraft, while one man sits in his seat and doesn't move." Diana's composure, which had held through the crew confrontations, through Hugh's observation, through the word criminal landing and being noted, cracked slightly now. Not into remorse, into irritation, which was its own kind of reveal. She crossed her arms. "This is absolutely unacceptable. He is holding 140 people on the ground over one seat. This has gone completely beyond—" "No!" Hugh Merritt's voice was even and unhurried. "You're holding them on the ground. He's refusing to leave what's his. Those are meaningfully different things." Diana turned to him. For a moment, she looked like she was going to answer, and then she looked at Hugh's expression, which was not angry, not contemptuous, just settled in the way of a man who has decided what the facts are. And she didn't. Linda Santos spoke clearly to the cabin rather than to any one person. "I have a connection in Atlanta. My daughter is waiting for me. We haven't seen each other in 8 months." She paused. "If I miss that connection, it's because someone in this cabin couldn't sit in the seat she was assigned to." She looked at Diana directly. "I want her to know I said that." The woman beside Linda nodded once. The man in 4B, who had been on his phone with quiet but increasing frequency, covered the receiver and said to no one in particular, "I'd buy more stock in any airline that fires the people who handled this. Just putting that out there." He went back to his call. Trevor made one final approach. He came back up the aisle with the expression of a man who has one move left and knows it is probably not going to work, but needs to exhaust every option before accepting that the situation has exceeded his authority. He crouched slightly beside Marcus's row, the posture of private conversation which the cabin was completely indifferent to, and said, his voice very low, "Sir, I want you to understand that if this delay continues, we have the authority to have you removed from this aircraft." Marcus turned his head slowly and looked at Trevor with the patient, specific attention of a man who has been asked to consider a threat and is considering it carefully. "On what grounds?" Marcus asked. "Disruption of the boarding process." "I am sitting," Marcus said, each word separate and clean, "in my seat. I have not raised my voice. I have not threatened anyone. I have not touched anyone. I have not used language that violates any airline policy. I have followed every rule that applies to me." He paused. "Now tell me again." On what grounds Trevor had no answer. He stood. He walked to the rear galley. From the galley entrance, Sophia Reyes watched him go. She exhaled through her nose slowly the breath of someone who has been holding more than air. Jordan narrated. The senior crew member just walked away. 7,000 people watching this right now. 7,000. And he just walked away. The comment feed had stopped being individual comments and had become a moving wall of text. Marcus reached into the inner pocket of his duffel. He had taken it down from the overhead when he sat, and took out his phone. He did this with no performance, no announcement. He found Damon Price's number. He dialed. Damon picked up on the second ring. Mr. Webb. Damon. Marcus's voice was conversational, unhurried, pitched at normal speaking volume because he had decided that what he was about to say should be heard. Activate the audit flag on Flight 318. I want everything from the last 25 minutes logged. Crew names, timestamps, specific language used. Route it to legal and to Claire Navarro. Already pulling it, sir. What level? Level 3. And tell Claire I'd like her at the gate. She's already on her way. Good. Marcus ended the call. He placed the phone back in his pocket. The entire exchange had taken 40 seconds. His voice had not exceeded the volume of normal conversation for a single syllable of it. The cabin had heard every word. Diana stared at the seat back in front of her. The first time in the 28 minutes since Marcus had stepped into this aisle that she was not meeting anyone's eyes. Trevor in the rear galley had gone still. He was looking at the floor with the expression of a man reviewing his choices from the beginning. Rachel was near the bulkhead. She looked at Sophia, who was standing calmly near row 2. Rachel's expression contained something that had not been there 20 minutes ago. Not guilt exactly, but the precursor to it the moment before a person allows themselves to understand what they have done. Jordan said into his stream, his voice stripped to its quietest and most careful register, I don't know who this man is. I cover airlines for a living, and I have been on this flight for 30 minutes, and I don't know who this man is. He paused. But I'm starting to think this airline does. His viewer count crossed 11,000. Natalie's TikTok clip, the one with watch her face when he talks, not his, had been shared by 2 aviation industry accounts and was being picked up by a travel journalist with 600,000 followers who had posted it with the caption, Someone tell me what airline this is. This is going everywhere tonight. The answer was in the caption of Jordan's stream. The answer was already everywhere. Diana had said it twice now in different framings. 6-year Apex customer flown this route 11 times, and both times the phrase had carried the specific implication that loyalty to a company conferred a kind of ownership of its spaces. That familiarity was its own entitlement. That having been here before meant you belonged here more than someone who simply had the boarding pass that said so. Marcus knew this logic. He had been on the receiving end of its mirror image more times than he could count. He was 38 years old. The acquisition had taken 2 years to close. 2 years of negotiations conducted quietly without press, without the specific performance that some buyers put on when they want the deal to be known before it's done. Marcus wanted the acquisition complete before his name became public. He had learned by 38 what happened when people put a face to an offer before the paperwork was signed, the way certain rooms changed temperature, the way certain conversations shifted register, the way certain doors that had been opened developed a slight resistance that no one would officially acknowledge. He had closed the deal in February. The announcement was scheduled for March. In the 3 weeks between closing and announcement, Marcus flew Apex twice. Once in economy, once in business class, because he wanted to know the airline from the inside before it became his officially. He wanted to sit in the seats. He wanted to eat the food, read the safety card, feel the specific quality of the service that his customers were receiving. The second flight was Phoenix to Atlanta. He was seated in economy, middle seat 22, B nothing upgraded, and the man who settled into 22A beside him was white mid-50s, expensively suited, the kind of man whose clothes communicated that he did not normally sit in 22B and was tolerating it with good-natured sufferance. The man had struck up a conversation within minutes of takeoff. It was the kind of conversation that Marcus had learned to navigate, pleasantly specific about the other person's context, pleasantly vague about his own. The man was in real estate, liked Phoenix, had meetings in Atlanta, was flying commercial because his regular charter was in maintenance, said charter the way people say it when they want the word to do work for them. He asked Marcus what he did. Marcus said, "Transportation logistics." The man laughed, warmly without malice, and said, "Funny, I've got meetings with some people who are trying to acquire this very airline. Good luck to them. It's a decent operation, but it needs someone with real vision, someone serious. You know what I mean." Marcus had said, "I agree completely." The man had fallen asleep somewhere over New Mexico. 3 weeks later, Marcus Webb was announced as the new majority shareholder and operational owner of Apex Airlines. The acquisition made front-page business news in 4 cities. 2 financial publications ran profiles. One described him as a quiet architect of something significant. He never found out if the man from 22A read about it. But he thought about that flight sometimes. The middle seat, the transportation logistics cover story, the warm laugh, someone serious, you know what I mean. He thought about the texture of being in a row or a room and being read as background rather than foreground, being processed as context rather than protagonist. He had been the protagonist of that story for 2 years before the man in 22A ever boarded the plane. He would be the protagonist of the industry for the decade that followed. None of that had been visible in the seat, in the clothes, in the face that the man beside him had assessed and filed under a category that had nothing to do with the actual facts. It never was. That was the thing Marcus had stopped being surprised by and never stopped being saddened by. Not the individual acts, the catering question at the door, the wrong assumption on the plane, the seat in the first-class cabin tonight, but the accumulation of them, the weight of a lifetime of being processed incorrectly by people who were certain they were processing correctly. He had built from that weight. He had built an airline from it. And now he was sitting in that airline in his seat, waiting. The intercom crackled. Delano's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a representative from operations coming aboard. We thank you for your continued patience." The cabin stirred. Marcus did not look up. He already knew who was coming. He had known since Damon said she's already on her way. 3 minutes passed between Delano's announcement and the gate door opening again. In those 3 minutes, the first-class cabin underwent a shift that was not dramatic or loud, but was entirely complete. The passengers who had been holding positions of careful neutrality, the specific neutrality of people in a public space who have formed an opinion but are calculating the cost of expressing it, began in small and irreversible ways to declare themselves. The man in 4B, who had been managing quiet phone calls since Marcus's exchange with Trevor, ended his latest call and put his phone face up on the tray table. On the screen, paused mid-frame, was a screen grab of Natalie's clip with the share count visible 340,000 views. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Linda Santos had taken out a small bag of mixed nuts from her carry-on and was offering some to the woman beside her, a stranger she had exchanged perhaps 12 words with since boarding. The gesture was small and specific, the gesture of a person who has decided to settle in for something, who has stopped calculating when this will end and started occupying the moment. Hugh Merritt had not picked up his newspaper again. He sat with it, folded in his lap, watching the cabin with the patient attention of a man who has witnessed enough important things to know one when it's happening and wants to see it fully. Sophia Reyes moved quietly through first class, refilling water glasses, adjusting overhead bins, doing her job with the calm efficiency of someone who has made a decision and moved to the other side of it. She paused at Marcus's row, briefly not hovering, and topped up his water glass. He acknowledged it with a small nod. She moved on. The atmosphere in first class was no longer the atmosphere of a seating dispute. It had become the atmosphere of a verdict waiting to be delivered. Diana, sitting in 2A, had stopped looking at her phone. She was looking ahead, at the seat back in front of her, at the small screen embedded in it, at the reflection of the cabin in the dark window beside her. She did not look comfortable. She did not look contrite. She looked like a woman in a room that had stopped being the room she thought she was in, and who had not yet found the register in which to receive that fact. When the gate door opened and Claire Navarro stepped into the jet bridge, Natalie Cruz turned her camera to the door. The reaction was immediate. The comments on her stream, which was still running, still climbing, shifted within 30 seconds. "Who is that? She's got a badge. Corporate." This just became something else. He called someone. The man in 4B picked up his phone and started another call. Diana straightened in her seat when she saw Claire enter. Her posture was the posture of someone who has been waiting for reinforcement and believes it may have arrived. That belief lasted approximately 30 seconds. Before Claire had fully cleared the doorway, Rachel approached her from the galley end, speaking quietly. Claire listened for 20 seconds. Her expression did not change. She nodded once, moved past Rachel, and came forward into first class with the calm of someone who has been fully briefed and has already reached her position. She looked around the cabin once, thorough, unhurried, and her eyes moved from Trevor to Rachel to Diana to Marcus in a progression that said considerably more than any of the words that followed. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Claire Navarro, Senior Operations Director for Apex, here in Phoenix. I've been asked to come aboard and resolve a seating matter on Flight 318. Her voice carried without effort. Clear, professional, without warmth or hostility. The voice of a woman who was going to do her job precisely and did not need the room's approval to do it. Trevor said, "Ms. Navarro, I've been trying to—" "I'll review the documentation first," Claire said. Not unkindly, but with the efficiency of someone removing an obstacle from between herself and the work. She looked at Marcus, Mr. Webb. "Your boarding pass, please." She looked at Diana, "Ms. Holloway, yours as well." Both passes were produced. Claire examined them with the methodical care of someone not performing carefulness but actually exercising it. Beside her, the younger man in the gray suit, the Apex corporate representative who had followed her aboard, was already working his tablet, scrolling through something that required his focused attention. The cabin watched. "Jordan, Ms. Navarro has been on board for 90 seconds, and she has already asked for documentation. 90 seconds. Contrast that with the last 32 minutes. The comment feed reflected this observation in approximately 40 different phrasings simultaneously. Claire looked up from the boarding passes. Her voice was the same, steady, clear, without editorial. Seat 2A is confirmed assigned to Mr. Webb. Seat 3C is confirmed assigned to Ms. Holloway. The documentation is consistent. There is no system error, no discrepancy. The assignment is clear." A collective exhale moved through first class. Diana said, "There must be—" "Ms. Holloway." Claire's voice did not rise. It simply stopped Diana's sentence. "The documentation is clear." One moment of silence. And then Diana, for the first time in 34 minutes, did not add another word. The younger man beside Claire looked up from his tablet. He spoke in the measured factual register of someone reading from a record, rather than editorializing about it. "Ms. Navarro, I need to note for the record, this passenger account is flagged in our system at Tier 1. Board advisory access. Priority protocols apply." He paused, looked at Marcus directly. Mr. Webb is a principal shareholder of Apex Airlines, majority equity holder. This aircraft, this route, and this crew fall under the operational umbrella of the company he owns. The cabin absorbed this in the specific way that large facts are absorbed in small rooms, in waves with a delay between reception and full comprehension, with the sound of people who are processing something they did not expect. Jordan's stream, his voice dropped to almost nothing. Did he? 14,000 people are watching this right now. Did he just say this man owns the airline? The comment feed became a waterfall. CEO. He owns it. Oh my God. He was testing them this whole time. From 1B, Hugh Merritt said, quietly, without drama, with the settled certainty of a man who has been watching this story build toward its ending and is satisfied to see it arrive. Well, there it is. Linda Santos put her hand over her mouth. The man in 4B stood up and began clapping. It was slightly premature, and slightly startled, and entirely genuine, the applause of someone who cannot wait for others to start, because the moment is too large to hold without release. Diana Holloway sat very still. The sparkling water glass was empty. The pearl bracelet caught the cabin light with each breath she took. Her phone was face down in her lap. She was looking at Marcus. Marcus did not stand, did not smile, did not look around the cabin to receive what the cabin was offering him. He sat in 2A, in his seat, and looked at Claire Navarro. His voice was the same voice it had been for the last 34 minutes, conversational, unhurried, the voice of a man who had never needed the room to know who he was. Thank you for coming, Claire. Then he turned to Diana. The cabin went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Not the taut quiet of conflict, not the held breath quiet of unresolved tension. The deep, clear quiet of a room that knows a true thing is about to be said and wants to hear it without interference. Marcus spoke, not loudly, not with performance, with the specific gravity of a man who has been patient for 34 minutes and has earned the right to every syllable. I came on this flight the same way I've been flying my own airline for 8 months, without my title, without any announcement, in regular clothes with one bag. Because I need to know what my customers experience. I need to sit in these seats and feel what they feel. Tonight, I found out. He paused. You sat in my seat and told me to find somewhere else. The crew confirmed it was mine and asked me to leave it anyway. You called yourself a loyal customer and used that to justify staying where you didn't belong. And someone in this cabin used the word criminal to describe a man who had done nothing except stand next to his own seat. Diana said nothing. Her hands were still on her lap. What you did tonight was not complicated, Marcus said. You decided in the 2 seconds you looked at me when I arrived at this row that I was someone you could dismiss, that the rules that applied to me were negotiable if you held your position long enough, that the crew would lean your direction. He looked at her steadily. You were right about 2 of those things. That's what tonight showed me. And that's what tonight is going to change. The cabin did not break into applause. It held the silence around his words like something that needed to be kept intact, undisturbed, allowed to be fully present before anything else happened. It was the exact right response. Before we get to what happened next, and what happened next is the kind of thing that stays with you, I want to ask you something real. Have you ever been in a room where the truth was right there on the table, clear for everyone to see, and people still found a way to look past it? Where the facts were settled, but someone kept arguing not because they had new information, but because accepting the facts would require them to accept something about themselves. If that question hits close to home, from either side of it, share this story. Because what Marcus did wasn't about winning. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about refusing to agree that the point needed proving. And that's different. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Because what happens in the next few minutes is the moment everything becomes permanent. The consequences, the truth, the change. Let's go. The cabin was still holding the silence that Marcus's words had made when Claire Navarro turned to Rachel and Trevor. Her voice was the same, measured professional without temperature. I'd like to understand the sequence of events here. Walk me through it from the beginning. Rachel spoke first. She gave the account in the clipped, careful register of someone who is trying to be accurate about facts while managing what those facts accurately stated reveal about her choices. She covered the boarding pass review, the confirmation of seat assignments, the offer of 3C, Trevor's arrival. She was honest about the sequence. She was less honest by omission about why the sequence had unfolded the way it had. Claire listened without interrupting. Then, when you confirmed that seat 2A belonged to Mr. Webb, what did you do, Rachel? I offered him 3C. You offered the confirmed passenger the wrong seat. I was trying to resolve the situation. You were trying to resolve the visible conflict, Claire said, not the actual problem. She looked at Trevor, and Trevor's account was shorter and slightly more fortified. The account of a man who has decided that posture is its own defense. Claire listened to it with the same quality of attention, and at the end, you were told before you arrived at row 2 that this was a passenger refusing to comply. Is that right? That's the briefing I received. And when you got there and assessed the situation yourself, when you saw both boarding passes confirmed both assignments, did you update your framing? Trevor held his posture. Did you ask yourself whether refusing to comply was an accurate description of what was happening? He said nothing. Claire turned back to the cabin and addressed both Rachel and Trevor together. I'm going to need written accounts from both of you by the end of the shift. Honest, complete accounts. Not the account that manages the optics. The account that tells me exactly what happened and exactly what you decided at each step. Sophia Reyes, standing near the galley, stood a degree straighter. Claire turned to Diana. She looked at her for a moment before speaking. The long, measuring look of someone who has reviewed the documentation and the testimony and is now looking at the person at the center of it, Ms. Holloway. You will need to move to your assigned seat, 3C, immediately. That is not a request. Diana stood. Her movements were slow and deliberate. She lifted her blazer from the hook above 2A and draped it over her arm. She collected her carry-on from the overhead. She gathered her phone and her empty water glass from the seat pocket with the careful, unhurried motions of a woman who has decided that she will not give anyone the satisfaction of watching her rush. She walked to 3C without looking at anyone. The cabin exhaled. It was not a collective gasp or a cheer. It was the specific relieved exhale of a room that has been holding tension for a long time and has finally been allowed to release it. Somewhere in economy, the sound of that exhale was audible. Passengers who had been craning toward the first-class curtain straightened back in their seats. A few people in first class began to clap. That soft building applause that starts in one row and travels because the person in the next row decides the moment warrants adding to it. It was not theatrical. It was genuine. The applause of witnesses who had watched something important happen and needed to mark it with something more than silence. Marcus did not acknowledge the applause. He adjusted his duffel in the overhead compartment and sat down fully in 2A for the first time. The seat finally, without qualification, his. Claire turned to Rachel and Trevor. Her voice remained even. Not punitive in its register, but without space for negotiation. Both of you are relieved of first-class cabin responsibility for the remainder of this flight. You'll complete the journey in your crew positions, but Sophia Reyes takes primary first-class responsibility as of now. Trevor, with respect, I've been senior cabin. You were senior cabin crew when a verified passenger was asked 3 times to vacate his confirmed seat, Claire said. That ends your authority in this cabin tonight. She looked at Rachel, whose eyes were on the floor. Rachel did not speak. The not speaking was its own kind of acknowledgement. Sophia Reyes moved forward without ceremony. She took her position near the forward galley with the calm efficiency of someone stepping into a role they were prepared for. She did not look triumphant. She did not make the moment about herself. She simply moved to where she was needed and began to work. She passed Marcus's row, and he gave her one brief, direct look. The same acknowledgement as before. Not congratulation, not gratitude, performed just recognition. One person seeing another clearly. Jordan Livestream, now running at 19,000 concurrent viewers, took a breath before speaking. I've been covering the airline industry for 6 years. I've documented a lot of things in a lot of airports. I have never watched anything like this. And what I want to say to the 19,000 people watching right now is the story wasn't the reveal. The reveal was just the confirmation of something that should have been clear from the first 2 minutes. The story was the 34 minutes before it. He paused. That's the part that changes things. If it changes things. Natalie Cruz posted a still Marcus seated in 2A. The overhead panel reading 2A, clearly above him the Apex corporate representative standing in the aisle with his tablet, Claire Navarro turning to address the crew. Caption: his seat, his airline. He waited for 34 minutes because he wanted everyone to see it clearly. Now everyone sees it clearly. Views 340,000 and climbing. The post was being shared by news aggregators' travel accounts, aviation industry publications, and individuals who had no connection to any of them, just people who had watched and needed to send it somewhere. 2 verified journalism accounts had posted "Someone DM me the airline and flight number. Running this tonight." The answer was already in Jordan's caption. It had been in his caption for 40 minutes. Claire turned to Marcus. She stood in the aisle with the composed directness of a woman who has done her job and is now doing something adjacent to it. Something more human. Mr. Webb. On behalf of Apex, I owe you a direct apology. What happened on this aircraft tonight was not consistent with our standards. It should have been resolved immediately. Marcus met her eyes. I know you mean that, Claire, and I appreciate it. He paused. But I want you to hold something for me. The passengers who don't own the airline, the ones who are asked to move and don't have a level 3 protocol to invoke, don't have Damon on speed dial, don't have majority equity in the company they're sitting in. They don't get an apology from operations. They just get moved. He held her gaze. That's who tonight is actually about. Claire held his gaze. Something moved in her expression. Not surprise because she was not easily surprised, but the specific gravity of a person who has just had the frame of a situation reoriented in a way they will not easily put back. She said, Yes, you're right. Then, what do you need from me tonight? Marcus said. Push back. Get this plane to Atlanta, and then we have work to do. Claire nodded once. She turned and moved toward the exit with the steady purpose of someone who has received her instructions from the person authorized to give them. Captain Delano reappeared from the cockpit. He had been briefed by Claire in the moment she passed the cockpit door. His face had been reorganized into something more honest than it had been when he came out the first time. Not humiliated, not performatively contrite, but genuinely reckoning. He walked directly to row 2. He did not go to Diana. He did not go to Trevor or Rachel. He came to 2A Mr. Webb. His voice was steady. I had the information I needed to resolve this correctly. I hesitated when I should have acted. I'm sorry. He said it plainly. No qualifications, no deflections, no procedural framing. Just the sentence. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Long enough to let the apology be real rather than transactional. Captain, I appreciate that. Genuinely. He held the eye contact. Do better next time. For the passengers who don't own the airline. Delano held his gaze. The last sentence landed on him with the weight it was meant to carry. He nodded once. The nod of a man who has received something he will not put down. Then he returned to the cockpit. The door closed. The engines began to spool. The gate bridge retracted with the familiar mechanical sound of departure, the particular combination of motor and rattle that is, for frequent flyers, the audio signal that something is finally irrevocably beginning. The aircraft moved backward from the gate with the slow, massive sureness of a thing that has decided to go somewhere. First class settled into a new kind of quiet. Not the quiet of unresolved conflict, not the taut silence of a room waiting for something to break. The quiet of a space that has been through something and is still processing what it means. The exhale that goes longer than a breath, that turns into a kind of sustained collective stillness. Several passengers looked at Marcus. Some held his gaze for a moment, then looked away, not dismissively, but with the specific quality of people who have witnessed something they don't fully know what to do with yet. The man in 4B had put his phone down for the first time in 40 minutes. He was looking out his window. Linda Santos had her hands folded in her lap and her eyes closed briefly, the expression of someone who is grateful for something and is allowing themselves to feel it before the next thing arrives. Hugh Merritt reached across the aisle and offered Marcus his hand. It was not a grand gesture. Hugh extended his hand the way people extend hands when they mean it, without ceremony, as a fact, rather than a performance. Marcus took it. They shook once. "I've been flying for 40 years, Hugh said. His voice was quiet for Marcus rather than the cabin. Tonight was the first time I felt like someone actually held the line, not for themselves alone, for the line itself. Marcus said, "You spoke up too, when it would have been easier not to." Hugh considered this. "I've been quiet in rooms like this before," he said. "More times than I'm proud of." He released Marcus's hand. "I'm working on that." That sentence, simple, honest, accountable, landed somewhere in Marcus that the applause and the viewer counts and the corporate confirmation had not quite reached. The private acknowledgement of a man naming his own failures to another man, not for absolution, just because it was true. There was something in it that felt to Marcus like the actual shape of what this night was supposed to be about. Linda Santos stopped by his row on her way to retrieve something from her overhead bag. She paused. "My daughter's going to hear about this," she said. "Not as a promise of spread, not as a threat to anyone. As a mother. I'm going to tell her exactly how you stood, and exactly why it matters." Marcus said, "Tell her the part about Sophia, too." Linda looked toward the forward galley where Sophia was moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had finally been given space to do her job properly. Linda nodded. Jordan Blake stopped on his way back from a brief trip to the galley. He had his notebook, an actual paper notebook, open in his hand. He was 31 and had been writing about the invisible rules of hospitality spaces for 6 years, and had spent most of those years wondering whether the writing changed anything. "I'd like to interview you sometime," he said. "When you're ready. No agenda. Just the full story." Marcus said, "Send me a message. I'll read it. I will." Jordan paused. "For what it's worth, the way you handled this, the whole thing, every minute of it. I've been documenting this kind of moment for 6 years. I've never seen it done this way." What way is that Jordan thought about it? Without giving them anything to use against you. You were never loud, never aggressive, never anything except exactly right. They had nothing. That's a skill. He paused again. "Or maybe it's something you've had to learn," both Marcus said. Jordan nodded and moved back to his seat. Diana Holloway was among the last people in first class to gather her things at the end of the flight. She moved through the sequence of deplaning preparation. Seatbelt off tray, up bag retrieved from the overhead. With the careful, controlled movements of a woman who has been watched for the past 40 minutes and is not going to provide any additional footage. She passed row 2 on her way toward the exit. She did not look at Marcus. She moved past the row at a steady pace, not rushing, not lingering. And then she stopped, just for a moment, Barely visible, barely a pause, but a pause nonetheless. Her hand went to the back of the seat in front of her, steadying herself for half a second in the way that people reach for something solid when they are moving through something large. Then she walked on. Marcus watched her go. He felt no satisfaction in the specific shape of the moment. The exit, the pause, the not looking. He felt something more complicated than satisfaction, something that had more weight in it. He had been clear-eyed about this. For 30 years, accountability was not the same as repair. The plane landing correctly was not the same as the airline being fixed. Diana moving to 3C was not the same as Diana understanding what had kept her in 2A. But it was the beginning of the beginning, and that was what tonight was. In the rear galley, Trevor Voss and Rachel Burns completed the flight in their assigned crew positions, serving economy with the specific contained efficiency of two people who were not speaking to each other and were not speaking to themselves. Whatever was happening in each of their heads, the private accounting that happens after a public failure, it was happening quietly and without audience. Sophia Reyes managed first class through landing with the competence and care that had always been there, waiting for the space to be expressed. She refilled water glasses, attended to the two passengers who requested blankets, handled a small overhead bin adjustment, and generally did her job with the ease of someone who has stopped expending energy on the calculation of whether she is allowed to do it. She paused at Marcus's row during final descent and said quietly, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "The audit you've been doing, flying as a regular passenger no title, does it usually go like tonight?" Marcus considered it. "Not usually this visible. But the underlying thing, the way the math gets done, who gets the benefit of the doubt and who gets the verification request, that shows up every time, in smaller ways, in ways that are harder to see if you're not looking for them." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "I've been looking," she said. "For 3 years. I just kept being told I was seeing it wrong." "You weren't seeing it wrong." "I know. I knew." She looked at him directly. It's different when someone refuses to let it be invisible. She moved forward to complete her pre-landing check. At Hartsfield-Jackson Flight 318 pulled into the gate 37 minutes behind schedule. The seatbelt sign chimed off. The cabin returned to the efficient choreography of deplaning. Overhead bins, opening bags, swinging down the forward press of 140 people who have somewhere to be. From economy, a young woman with a school backpack stopped at the first-class curtain and looked at Marcus without knowing exactly who he was. Just a man in a charcoal Henley in seat 2A who had word apparently spreading through economy sometime around Texas, refused to give up his seat for 40 minutes and somehow ended up grounding the plane. She said, "Good for you. Simple. Direct." She disappeared back into the economy line. Marcus stood. He took his duffel from the overhead. He was the last person in first class to leave. Not because he was dawdling, but because he had taken 40 minutes to sit down in this seat, and he was going to take a moment to acknowledge that he was leaving it. He looked at the seat once. 2A, the overhead panel, his boarding pass, which he had been holding for 40 minutes and which he folded now and put in his pocket. Then he walked off the aircraft. Somewhere over New Mexico, in the hour and a half between takeoff and landing, when the cabin had settled into the quiet hum of cruise altitude, Marcus's phone had buzzed on the tray table. A message from Damon Price. Pulled the audit flag data from Flight 318's route. "Phoenix to Atlanta, last 4 months. You need to read this. Attached a summary document 12 pages dense with complaint logs, crew notes, resolution language, and timestamps." Marcus had read it twice before they began their descent into Atlanta. 6 documented passenger complaints on this specific route over the previous 4 months. Each complaint concerned a first-class seating dispute. A passenger challenged about their seat assignment asked to produce additional verification or offered an alternative seat that was not the one they had paid for. In 5 of the 6 cases, the passenger who filed the complaint was a person of color. In all 5, the crew response notes in the system used one of 3 phrases, resolved by passenger cooperation, or passenger agreed to alternative accommodation, or situation handled, no further action required. 5 people who had filed complaints, which meant 5 people who had not simply moved and stayed silent, 5 people who had pushed back enough to put something in writing. And all 5 of their complaints had been closed with language that described the resolution as voluntary. Voluntary. As if cooperation meant the same thing for everyone. As if choosing to stop fighting because the cost of continuing was too high was the same as choosing because it was fine. Marcus looked out the window at the dark geometry of the landscape below for a long time after he finished reading. He thought about those 5 passengers. He thought about the ones who had moved before they got to the complaint stage, who had done the math, found it not in their favor, and sat in the wrong seat for the rest of the flight without a word of record. He had no data for those passengers. They had left no trail. They had simply absorbed the moment and carried it forward. He was the 7th person this had happened to on this route. He was the first one for whom it had not resolved through passenger cooperation. He thought about what that meant, not for himself, but as a structural fact about the route, about the crew culture, about the specific pattern of small enforcements and small capitulations that accumulated over months and years into something that no single incident report could fully capture, but that shaped the experience of flying while being seen a certain way every single time. He set the phone face down on the tray table and looked out the window until Atlanta appeared on the horizon. After the plane landed, after the deplaning, after the conversations at row 2, he walked through the terminal to the ground transportation level with his duffel over one shoulder, and he called Damon. "I read the report." "Yeah," Damon said. The single syllable contained more than the word itself. "Who owns the response notes? Which crew members are logging these resolutions? Different crew on different flights. But the language is consistent. Too consistent to be coincidental. Someone's been trained to write it this way, or instructed to, or both." Marcus stopped walking, stood near a window looking out at the tarmac, the plane that had just carried him home still visible in the distance. Pull everything he said. All routes, all first-class complaint logs, 18 months. I want every incident where the resolution language describes passenger cooperation, passenger accommodation, or similar framing. I want crew names, flight numbers, dates, and demographic data where available. That's a significant pull. I know. Route it to Claire and legal. I want a full report in 2 weeks. Done. One more thing. Marcus watched the plane on the tarmac for a moment. Sophia Reyes, Flight 318. She told me tonight she pushed back on situations like this twice before and was told she was misreading them. I want to know who told her that, and I want it in the report. A pause. You going to do something about it? I'm going to do something about everything Marcus said, starting Monday. He hung up. He stood at the window a moment longer. He was thinking about a woman he would never meet. One of the 5 passengers in the complaint log 3rd entry 8 weeks ago, a Tuesday afternoon flight. She had filed a complaint, received the standard response, and then filed a follow-up 3 days later asking whether any action had been taken. The follow-up had been marked closed, no response required. She had taken the time to follow up. She had believed enough to write a second email that someone might read it and do something, that the process might respond. It had not responded. Marcus folded her complaint into his memory alongside Brad Townsend and the door at the Charlotte Club, in the middle seat on the Phoenix to Atlanta flight where a man in a good suit had told him the airline needed someone with real vision. He walked toward ground transportation. He had work to do. The board meeting was scheduled for Monday. Marcus was in his office by 6 in the morning, which was earlier than his assistant arrived, earlier than his executive team arrived, earlier than almost anyone in the Apex headquarters building arrived except the cleaning crew who he greeted by name. He had 3 documents open on his screen, and the leather journal on the desk beside the keyboard open to the notes he had made on the flight home, not on the incident which was being documented in full by Claire and legal and Damon, but on what the incident meant. the private accounting in his own hand of what had been confirmed and what needed to change. He had been running the anonymous audit for 8 months. He had filled half a journal with observations. He had noted the gate agent who snapped at the woman with the stroller, the businessman who unplugged the elderly man's phone, the specific moments where the invisible rules of who was welcome and who was scrutinized became briefly uncomfortably visible. He had been patient about it because he had wanted to be certain before he acted, and because he knew that certainty in this specific domain required evidence that was harder to dismiss than a feeling. He was certain now. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. Marcus presented the audit findings. Not just Flight 318, but the full 8 months, the pattern across routes. The specific vocabulary of the complaint resolution notes the cases where passenger cooperation had served as a permanent close on something that deserved a genuine response. He presented it without anger, which was the only register in which it could be received, without deflection. The board was quiet for a long time after he finished. The chair, a woman named Rosario Gaines, who had been with Apex since the acquisition, said, "What do you want to do?" Marcus said. "I want to make it impossible for this to continue invisibly. That's the only goal. Not punishment, not press releases. Real change that makes the next incident impossible to bury." They worked through the details for the remainder of the meeting. Within 48 hours of landing in Atlanta, 3 things had happened. Trevor Voss and Rachel Burns had been placed on administrative review their conduct on Flight 318 under formal investigation. Marcus had said this explicitly to the HR director, a woman named Carol Wiley, who had been with the company for 9 years. "I don't want witch hunts. I want honest evaluation. If they can be retrained, retrain them. If the audit shows a pattern that can't be corrected, that's a different answer. But the process has to be real." Carol had looked at him across her desk and said, "It will be." Claire Navarro had been formally tasked with leading the complaint audit. 18 months of records, all routes, the full scope. She had a direct line to Marcus, a 12-week timeline, and the authority to pull any documentation she needed from any part of the operation. She started the following morning. Sophia Reyes had received a formal commendation in her personnel file. It was signed by Marcus personally. The language was specific. Displayed integrity under professional pressure on Flight 318. Demonstrated the values this airline claims to hold and chose to hold them at personal professional risk. This is what we are building toward. 3 weeks later, a senior cabin position opened on the Atlanta-Miami route. A promotion Sophia had applied for twice and been passed over for twice. She received the offer on a Tuesday. She accepted it. The audit Claire ran took 11 weeks. What it found was not a single problem on one route. It was a pattern, documented older than Flight 318 by at least 2 years, of complaint handling that had been shaped consciously or not to keep the surface smooth at the cost of the passengers who had absorbed the friction. 14 documented incidents in 18 months. In 12 of them, the passenger who yielded their confirmed seat was a person of color. In 9, the resolution notes used the phrase cooperatively resolved. In 6, the initial complaint had been received and then closed without contact from any Apex representative. Marcus read the audit report at his desk on a Wednesday morning in late April, 6 weeks after Flight 318. He read it in full, all 63 pages without stopping. When he finished, he sat for a long time without moving. Then he wrote the mandate himself. 1 page. Direct language. No softening. When a seat assignment is confirmed in the Apex manifest, the confirmed passenger holds the seat. No crew member has the authority to offer an alternative arrangement, solicit voluntary cooperation, or suggest that the confirmed passenger accommodate another passenger's preference. The assignment stands. The passenger it belongs to keeps it. This policy applies to all cabins, all routes, all crew at every seniority level. Exceptions require written authorization from operations director level or above. This policy is non-negotiable, and its enforcement will be monitored directly by the Office of the CEO. This policy is named the 318 Standard, not after himself, after the flight number, because it was never about him. 3 months after Flight 318, Marcus boarded the route again, Phoenix to Atlanta. A Thursday evening, the same departure time, the same terminal. He arrived at the gate the same way he always arrived. Early alone, gray polo and dark jeans, single duffel over one shoulder. No announcement, no advance notice to the crew. Damon had booked the seat under his name the way he always booked it. He walked the jet bridge slowly. He stepped into the aircraft, turned left. Seat 2A was empty. He sat down. The cabin filled around him without incident. Nobody challenged him. Nobody looked at him twice. Nobody asked him to verify anything. A flight attendant, someone new, someone he had never seen, a young woman whose name tag read Amber, stopped at his row and said in a voice that was neither theatrical nor impersonal, "Good evening, Mr. Webb. Can I get you anything before we push back?" She said his name the way it should be said, not with performance, not with the specific, careful warmth of someone who has been told to be careful, just as a fact. She knew who her passengers were because knowing was part of her job, and she had done her job. "Water, please," Marcus said. "Room temperature." "Of course." She moved forward without ceremony. He reached into his duffel and took out a book, something he had been meaning to read for 3 months, and had not gotten to because there had been too much work. He opened it to the first page. The gate bridge retracted. The engines spooled. The announcement came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Apex Flight 318 non-stop service to Atlanta." Marcus looked out the window. Phoenix was still bright, the grid of the city extending outward in the specific geometry of a place that has grown faster than anyone planned. He watched it for a moment. The cars on the highways, the lights coming on in the early evening, the ordinary, ongoing life of a city that had no idea what had happened in a first-class cabin 3 months ago, and would never know, and did not need to know. He thought about Sophia Reyes somewhere in the Atlanta-Miami corridor tonight, doing her job in the senior position she had earned and been denied twice before she was finally given it. He thought about Jordan Blake, whose long piece on the incident had run in a national publication 2 weeks ago, careful, specific, documented, and who had sent Marcus a copy with a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for not making it easy." He thought about Linda Santos, who had messaged him through the Apex customer contact system the week after the flight, with a note that said her daughter had heard the story and that they had talked about it for a long time, about what it meant to stand firm about what it cost and what it changed. He thought about the 5 passengers in the complaint logs. He thought, this is for them. And then he thought about something else, something simpler, something that had been true before any of it and would remain true long after. He had loved planes since he was 9 years old. That hadn't changed. He had built an airline because he believed that the act of moving people from one place to another was at its best a form of care, a commitment that the person who boarded was going to arrive safely, comfortably, with their dignity intact. That was the whole of it. Every policy, every route, every crew training, every audit, every mandate, all of it was in service of that one simple thing. He hadn't expected it to require so much fighting. He had fought anyway. He was still fighting. The plane began to move. Outside the window, Phoenix fell away below. The lights diminishing, the grid losing its detail, the city becoming an abstraction of light and distance, and then finally the dark. Marcus opened his book to the first page and began to read. There are moments in life when the easiest thing and the right thing point in completely opposite directions. When sitting down in someone else's seat, or someone else's version of your life, feels simpler than standing in what's yours. Marcus Webb didn't stand because he needed to win. He stood because the passengers who came after him needed him too. The ones without the equity stake, or the operations director's phone number, or the leverage of ownership. The ones who had done the math and found it not in their favor, and quietly moved, carrying the weight of that moment forward in ways no complaint log ever captured. He stood for them. So the next time someone asks you to shrink, quietly, reasonably, for everyone's convenience, remember this flight. Remember what it cost him to stay still. Remember what staying still changed. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button. It's free, and it means more stories like this one find their way to you. Drop a like on this video and let us know in the comments. Would you have stood firm? Have you ever been in a moment like this, where the right thing and the easy thing were pointing in opposite directions? Tell us your story below. Respect isn't optional, and silence was never the price of peace.